Well, hey, friends, welcome to the Everyday Mulemanship Podcast. I'm Ty Evans. Thanks for tuning in today. For this episode, we have a really cool guest named Gillian Larson. Gillian has rode over 14,000 trail miles. She's been back and forth from Mexico to Canada numerous times, spends a ton of time in the backcountry riding her horse and her mule. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with her about all these adventures. She has online courses. She has an incredible Instagram. You got to go check it out at Thru. And anyways, I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be good. I would love it if you'd leave us a review. Leave us 5 stars if you think we deserve it. And let us know how you like the podcast. Let us know how you like the guests. Give us any feedback you'd like. You can also email me, ty@tsmules.com, or visit our website, tsmules.com. Huge thanks to our sponsors to make this podcast free for you to listen to. We got Roman Home Tents. If you like to hunt, pack, you like to camp, you like to get in the backcountry like I do, take a Roman Home Tent with you. Also, Colt Saddlery. Building dang good saddles. I love my saddle. It's awesome. Put a lot of miles on that saddle now. So look up Colt Saddlery on Facebook. They do a great job. Also, Western Mule Magazine, as well as Mules and More Magazine, taking care of your mule education. Check out those magazines; they're wonderful. I've subscribed to them for a long time, and I also write for Western Mule Magazine. So be sure to check out my articles in there. Let me know how you like them, and if you ever have any suggestions on articles that you'd like me to write, let me know. I don't get I don't get a ton of feedback on those articles, so if there's something you'd like me to write about, or if there's something you'd like to say about one of my articles, let me know. And also Diamond W Enterprises. It's just about that time to get your mare bred. So if you're looking for a good jack, look up Diamond W Enterprises in Fountain Green, Utah. My buddy Kevin right over there. He'll take care of you. And with that, let's get to Miss Gillian Larson. All right, Miss Gillian, we are on. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you.
No, thank you for having me, Ty. I've been a long time fan, so it's really honestly an honor for me.
Yeah. So I had Alyssa and her husband Jason on the podcast. And I'll ask you the same thing at the end, but I always ask for, if there's anybody that they think I should have on the show or whatever. And Alyssa's like, oh yeah, you got to have Jillian on. So
Oh, wow. That's nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I've been following
yeah,
them for a long time too.
yeah, they're cool people. So, and she has a lot of friends. She knows a lot of people, so she's a good resource.
Yeah, she is a good resource for you. I know she's got a lot of other cool people she could have thrown names into the hat for.
But I appreciate you. So I've been checking out your Instagram and all your doings and happenings, and holy cow, you've been everywhere, man. Like the song.
At least in the West, yeah, I haven't gone too far east. I'm sure you've been many places farther east than I have, but yeah, if it's in the West, side of the Continental Divide, then I probably want to go explore it.
Oh yeah. Well, it looks like you do some cool stuff, and your mule Carly looks pretty
Yeah.
cool. So,
You actually met Carly before I did. Her previous owner had taken her when she was trying to get her, backed. She took her to a clinic of yours. I think it probably would have been like 2018, 2017, or something like that. Because she was a driving mule. And
mm,
so she was having and she's pretty reactive, but she was pretty nervous about, having someone above her. And so you had kind of like helped her former owner get her at least backed. So
oh,
yeah, small world. That's how I heard about you, was when I got Carly from her former owner. She was telling me all about you.
oh, sweet. Well, looks like a
I
cool
know,
mule,
right?
and
Yeah, she's a
now you
very good
got
girl.
yeah,
Yeah.
you got some miles on her. It looks like, and I was looking at your Instagram. It's over 14,500 backcountry miles.
Yeah, I might be up to 15,000 now. I didn't do the math on what I did this last summer, but I did somewhere between like 600 and 800 miles. So we're probably over the 15,000 mile threshold now. But yes,
That's cool.
I can't get enough of it. Yeah, it's been a little over a decade now of like consistently logging miles every summer.
Yeah, I've never kept track of miles. And after seeing that on yours, I'm like, I wish I would keep track. I wonder where I'd be.
I know I don't
Um,
keep track of anything outside of like my backcountry trip. So I don't even
yeah,
know how many miles on trail or whatever that I've
yeah,
logged. But it's easier for me to try to keep track of like the trips, and like remember when I was traveling to some trailhead for a couple days. That
mhm.
those are the things that I can more easily than remember what route I took, and I can like backtrack to get my miles because I'm not disciplined enough to like keep a log book and like do it while I'm actually out in the process. So yeah, I can't be 100% diligent about it myself.
That's pretty cool though. I have a online class. We call it our master class, and there's a few of the students that I coach on there that I encourage them to keep track of their miles, like just to see
Yeah,
for consistency of writing, because you only get better at this stuff if you do it. Like you got to go do the
yeah.
thing. So having something like to measure, whether it's miles or hours or days or whatever, I think it's pretty cool. But yeah, I don't know that I've logged that many backcountry trips like you have. That many miles. I've got a lot of miles ranching, like trotting out to go find some cows.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it's nothing for us to trot out, like I mean, 30 or 40 miles trotting out in a day.
That's a
That
lot.
adds
I
up
don't think
pretty
Harley
quick.
would have that much trot in her. She's more like a 3 miles per hour gal. Like going much above that, unless it's for a really short distance and she's
Yeah.
running away from something, like we're probably not going to do a lot of mileage at any kind of speed.
Oh man. Well, I got all kinds of things, Jillian, that I want to talk about, but I kind of want to start, I guess, way back. So like, how'd you get into horses and mules and doing this long ride and stuff? I mean, like, let's go way back.
I mean, definitely the whole equine bug was given to me by my mom for sure. She competed in dressage. That was her big thing. She did a little show jumping too when she was younger. But while I was growing up, she was definitely doing kind of like the California AA dressage circuit. We grew up in like the LA area, just kind of like on the outskirts of it in a place called Topanga Canyon. Um, and so she would board her horse at a facility, and I'd be dragged to the barn every day almost as like a child to while she'd be working her horse. And she had a little pony that she would leased out for me that was so small we didn't even have a saddle for it. She just had like a surcingle that and a like dressage pad that she would put on the little like Shetland pony and then like plop me on it and just like, all right, I'll see you in an hour after I'm done schooling my horse. And I would pretty much be left to my own devices at like 4 and 5 to just like bugger around the, pretty large facility. And there was a pretty good trail network. And so usually like her only rule was that I could still see the like boarding facility. So yeah, I had a lot of kind of like free reign as a kid growing up, and
Yeah.
yeah, but that was kind of what got it into me, and just something about even at a really young age being allowed to just kind of like explore and like go to places that I wanted to was like full autonomy and in a pretty like large area is a lot for a little kid, but I thankfully didn't get myself into too much trouble. So, but yeah, I think that like very early planted a seed of liking horses and just something about like trail riding too. I never got the dressage bug, but the trail riding bug at that very early age kind of got into me.
Yeah. Like it feels good to go somewhere. Like, let's go
Yeah.
to this spot or to that spot or whatever.
And
I
obviously,
kind
as a little kid, like I didn't have any maps or any
Right.
idea of even where I wanted to go. You're more just like wherever the wind takes you or the pony that day. Yeah, there was just something enjoyable about it. And then whenever my mom would finish her like schooling her horse, she would usually take me on like a small like 15-20 minute trail ride. And so that was always something that like I was looking forward to at the end of like each hour that we'd be at the barn to go on like a little trail ride, the two of us. Yeah, and it just kind of like carried on from there. I got my first horse when I was 7, and was really only interested in doing trail riding. And so my poor mom, then she had to lease a trail horse so that she could take, trails. And she took me horse camping for the first time when I was like 8 years old, 8 or 9. I'd asked her to go riding on the beach, and she found a place like 3 hours north of LA that with a horse campground that was near the beach. And that was like her first time ever going horse camping. And she literally just packed me and two horses up in, the car and took us north and went camping. And we didn't, again, we were not like, didn't have the maps, didn't have a whole lot of info. We got lost a lot, but there was just like that adventure and that kind of like fearlessness about trying something new and outside of your comfort zone that I do think my mom gets a lot of credit for kind of like planting that kind of bug in me.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I grew up too. Just wander off, like go
Yeah.
wherever you want, go play, go ride, do whatever, you know. And I guess that's kind of how we try to parent our kids. I have two daughters, and we kind of let them just, yeah, do whatever they want.
Yeah,
Go,
it's
go
it's
ride,
an
go play.
unusual way to do things, especially I think my mom had been kind of parented that way, at least where she grew up in Topanga. It was like a one stop sign kind of town overall, so it was a little bit different than the typical LA area, but Topanga's kind of turned into more of like your typical LA area as I was growing up. So I do feel fortunate that I think I kind of like grew up just before the real shift in some parenting styles kind of like took over. So yeah, I feel lucky that I got, even in the kind of urban more environment that I grew up in, I do feel lucky that I got a lot of free reign as a kid, thanks to my mom.
Oh yeah. So as you so you get this horse and now you're camping more often.
Yeah.
So talk about like teenage years and moving on up to all this big stuff that you do now.
Yeah, I got my horse ended up being kind of like my main like Mexico to Canada horse. And I think really because I had her, it made me even think that riding Mexico to Canada when the idea did come up many years later seemed like a possibility because she was a quarter horse. I got her when I was 13. And she was just a hot horse. Like she had two speeds and it was jigging or running. And it took a couple years to kind of like get a walk on her. As a teenager, I didn't have a whole lot of horsemanship skills, so I wasn't doing it the pretty way. Like we could have gotten, the results I wanted a lot easier if it was, an adult that had been working with her. But I was just going by trial and error, so we were slow to progress. But she was just such an athlete. Like I'm sure, how like Secretariat, supposedly had like, a heart that was like super enlarged or something, and just was like better at blood pumping. I'm like convinced that Shyla must have had like crazy lung capacity or crazy heart or something physiologically abnormal because she was a freak of nature in terms of her stamina. Like she never, the quietest and calmest that she would be was always at the beginning of the ride. And from like that moment on, it was just like she got like more energy. She was like a, self-charging energizer bunny. So yeah, it was impossible to tire her out. It was just impossible. So I got her at 13 and she was definitely a handful. I was definitely pretty overhorsed with her, but was making do. We bred her when I was 14. So she had a colt Dakota when I was 15. So that was obviously a fun experience. And then I went away to college and I had three horses at the time. My old horse from when I was 7, who is now retired, and he was in heart failure. And so he needed like daily medication. And then I had Shyla, and then I had her 2-year-old colt. And so kind of trying to find a way to take three horses to college was a bit of a interesting like qualifier. So I kind of settled on Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, which was also in the same town where my mom had taken me horse camping. So there for sure was just kind of like this extra, like I know there's pretty good riding in the area. It was definitely an extra incentive for me to go to that university. They had a lot of access to, like they're one of the few campuses in California that have like a lot of land because they do run their own cattle too out there on pasture that backs up into the national forest. So there was just a lot more ability to get out and explore and kind of do the kind of stuff that I liked doing. So I took my horses to college with me at Cal Poly. Um, and that was a really fun experience. And then right before I graduated, I was kind of looking into going to grad school, but I was feeling pretty burnt out. And I was on a little short backpacking trip with my mom, and she had read an article in the LA Times about a woman who had set like the speed record for hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And she did it in like under 2 months, I think like 50 something days. Which is
Wow.
like Pacific Crest Trail is like almost 2,600 miles long. So you do the math on that. She's walking like basically 50 miles a day to get it done, which is insane. But the real part for me that like cemented in my brain was the fact that there even was a trail that went continuously across the country. I'd never heard of the Pacific Crest Trail or anything quite like that. And I don't know, it just resonated that I really wanted something that was going to be a total break from just academia and feeling like I was kind of like on a certain trajectory of like, okay, you've done, 4 years of undergrad. Now you're going to go do at least 2 years of a master's degree. And it just kind of felt like life was all like planned out and I was feeling a little burnt out and wanted something to just shake things up. And I was hoping I would get something out of my system. Um, I didn't get anything out. More stuff just came in the end, but that was my hope at the time. Um, and I really was excited about the idea of doing it with my horses. I'd studied abroad the year before, and it was, I kind of started to realize I wasn't really the type that just liked to go out and travel. I really missed my horses and having that component in my life. I've had that in my life since I was a tiny child, and living in another country for 6 months and not having the horses, I realized kind of like what a vacancy it left. And I really didn't kind of want to do the typical thing that people do after they finish school and they go and backpack around for a year. I realized that that was not what I wanted to do. So I was like, how can I incorporate my horses, obviously, then in the United States, and still do something that feels like I am could hopefully get something out of my system. So hearing about the Pacific Crest Trail and that hike with my mom was like, yes, that clicks all the boxes. So pretty much from that moment on, I was pretty like dead set on, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And as soon as we got back to cell service a couple days later, like that's the first thing I'm Googling is like, can horses go on the Pacific Crest Trail? And like the trail was open to stock. So yeah, from then on, I was just trying to self-educate myself through basically the internet, which there's not a lot of resources, at least not 10 years ago online, 11 years ago. Um, and pretty much just kind of winged it and like tried to get myself prepared, got some gear, not the best gear by any means, but got myself down to the Mexican border in April of 2014 and just kind of like took off from there. And yeah, it was definitely a real steep learning curve. I had zero backcountry experience with horses. I hadn't even like set up a tent in the back country. I set up a tent in the front country, but I just had literally not ever done any kind of like true backpacking or horse packing. And of course, like, I wasn't trying to be that level of unprepared, but my horse had also had an injury like from spring of 2013. I then heard about the trail in August of 2013, and then she really wasn't kind of like sound to start riding again until about February, March, like in terms of consistently sound of 2014. And then I got on trail like very early April 2014. So I was just trying to condition her. There was no, especially in spring, like where are you going to go on a pack trip unless you like haul out to the desert somewhere. So, so yeah, there was very little practice that happened. It was basically, I wasn't even sure I was going to make it down to the border because of my horse not having a hard time coming up sound again. She had a check ligament tear, and those ligaments just take forever to kind of like fully heal. But yeah, we made it, and somehow we also made it on the trail. Like I said, very steep learning curve. It was very humbling. I think I cried every single day on the trail, but there was also something about it that, you just feel more alive when you're out
Yeah.
there. And you do have also highs, every day would have these like amazing moments where you just feel like as alive as a person can. And then also even when, you're crying, you're also feeling decently alive. You're at least not numb. And it was just, it felt like too in the 4 or 5 months that I was on trail, it felt like an entire lifetime had been lived. Like every day is just like, you're just so living in the present. And it just felt so good to be in that kind of like mind state after being in the university world and just, we are kind of like always like thinking, ahead and like, oh, I have this coming up and I have this deadline and I need to study for this. And oh, I need to think about my future too while I'm at it. It's just you kind of start not quite feeling like yourself. There's like a certain disconnect that happens, and something about getting to be out on that trail was very grounding for sure. And of course, just being in like the backcountry world for then the next couple years, you see a lot of mules. I had like zero interaction with them in LA, like absolutely zero, and really didn't get to start hearing about them or hearing kind of their qualifications for being really good stock in the backcountry in particular until I started running into a lot of packers. And they were always telling me because I was packing my gelding Dakota, they were always saying, "Oh, once you get a mule, you'll really have like an elite setup then." And I will give Dakota credit. He was a very good packer. Like he was incredibly smart. I think he has more of a mule brain on him than like a typical horse brain in terms of he's so good at problem solving. But in terms of like physically, he's very high maintenance. Not a tough guy. Definitely requires like lots of caretaking to make sure that he can physically make it, long distances on trail. And once I did get Carly, that was by far the biggest difference I noticed is she's just like indestructible. Like World War III can happen and like there'll be cockroaches and Carly will be what's left afterwards. Like she can survive anything. I've had her for years now and I still have yet to see her bleed. And she never drops any weight and she never gets any sort of like rubs or saddle soreness. She's just like indestructible, which is really nice. Like, so much of my efforts on my big Mexico to Canada rides went into caretaking for the horses and finding them enough food and keeping their weight up. And I would pack a lot of feed for them. That was by far the biggest challenge of those rides was keeping my horses in good condition and injury free and allowing them to like finish the ride in ideally as like good condition as they started. And that's not at all a struggle with Carly around. Like that huge chunk of what used to be like, my highest concern on trail is now like, oh, that's not a worry with Carly. Like she's so self-sufficient and so good at keeping her weight up. She loves to eat, as like most mules do. Yeah. So convincing her to keep her calorie intake up is not exactly a chore anymore.
Yeah.
And she camps close. I can just turn her loose at night and that she doesn't wander off. Yeah, I can see why outfitters and packers really like having mules along because they do not require kind of like the level of like helicoptering that it felt like it takes to keep my horses, on the straight and narrow. The mules really do take care of themselves. Their level of like self-preservation is incredibly high.
Oh yeah. That hybrid vigor in them. I mean, it just makes them tough.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, most mules,
tough everything.
yeah. Yeah, most mules I've been around, I remember I remember one time I was talking to my vet and it was when I was training for the public and I probably had 30 or 40 head of mules in at my place and he said and I had just brought one in for something whatever. I don't remember. It wasn't that big of a deal. But he said, if you had 30 or 40 horses in this place, you'd be a lot better customer to me.
It's true. It's true.
I
Yeah,
mean,
Carly really doesn't, cost me much. I think I
yeah.
had like one melanoma. She's gray. I had one melanoma removed from her, and that was it. Yeah, that's like the only time I've ever had to call the vet out for Carly is to like have a tiny pea-sized melanoma cut off.
So I want to go back a little bit because something that fascinates me, and this is why I have guests like you and so many others that are just amazing on my show, is I want to know what makes that brain of yours tick. So let's go back to that article that you read
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
this Pacific Crest Trail deal.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face reality. There's a lot of women that would read that and go, "Man, that's crazy. I would never do that." And let alone by yourself. Like, so what's in your brain that makes you read something like that, you're like, "Oh yeah, I'm going for that."
I think the alone part for me was at least that was probably the easiest piece of the puzzle. Um, because like I said, kind of like from 4 years old, I'd kind of been at least like willing to go off on my own, and kind of explore. And I was an only child, and we eventually did when I was 12 move. We got a property that we had it was like a half acre plot, but we had just enough space for like one or two horses in the back. So from like 12 on, we kept our horses on our own property. And again, being an only child, though, then I was pretty much out riding alone in the local state park. And even in college, pretty much no one was willing to go kind of like riding and trail riding the way I wanted to, or could really keep up with Shyla's athleticism. Like she was just like such a goer that we were just going to leave everyone in the dust. And like me having to hold her back all the time was really just frustrating for her. And so she wouldn't be a very fun horse to ride in kind of like a group dynamic, just from the constant having to like hold her back. I couldn't really just let her relax.
Yeah.
So we pretty much rode alone all the time. Like most of my life was spent riding alone. So that part was easy. I didn't think twice about that part. But yeah, the whole Mexico to Canada part, that was, I'm sure, just like some 20, I guess I was 21 at the time when I heard about it. That was just some typical 21-year-old arrogance right there and naivety of like, we can go do this. This will be fine. I think I'm grateful in a sense of how naive I was, because I think otherwise my fears would have, if I had known quite how hard it was gonna be, I don't know if I would have gotten started. Like that naivety was helpful. Um,
Yeah.
and I wasn't super ego driven. And that was also, it was like that perfect balance of like, I'm naive, but I'm also very eager to learn. I think was like really what helped me there, because once I was on trail and still knew nothing and still had like no kind of actual conceivable game plan that was going to work. I was constantly having to basically just, the minute something wasn't working, I was completely willing to just scrap everything and try something new or listen to someone's advice, which, that can be not always the best move. You're not always going to be getting great advice. Sometimes the advice you're getting is not good advice. So that, that didn't always serve me, but I was definitely willing to hear and listen to anyone and everyone that I could. I was desperate to be told what to do and like to have some sort of, words of wisdom. So I do think that that kind of like served me well in terms of really naive, didn't know how hard it was going to be, but at least also incredibly willing to learn and to try new things. And I think that that kind of mindset, obviously, regardless of what age you are, what skill level you're at, as long as you're always willing to learn and try to constantly take on new information and try new things, and not get stagnant, I think that that's only ever beneficial.
Yeah, I think that being humble, that's what we call it. It's just being
Yeah,
humble. Being
yeah,
humble and be like, okay, there's more to learn out here.
right.
Especially there's something about the mountains and nature just in general that will humble you. It's
Oh,
either
yeah.
you be humble or you will be humbled. Like
Yes.
it's like
Yeah,
yeah,
very
it's
quickly.
incredible.
Yeah, very quickly on trail, I learned, there was like a hierarchy, and the top of the hierarchy for sure was Mother Nature, and she sets the rules of the game, and you have to play by that. And then the next hierarchy was like the horses and like their kind of physical and mental capabilities, and like I had to then work within their parameters. And then at the bottom of the list was whatever I wanted to do, and like
Mhm.
whatever I wanted was completely basically a mute point. Like I wanted to go Mexico to Canada. That was like the only input I ever got. After that, it was entirely determined by, Mother Nature and the mountains and the rules that like, she was setting for that day. And then obviously the constraints of like the horses and what they could physically do. So yeah, learned really quickly that what I want was not usually necessarily what was going to happen that day. I was just trying to like play by the rules once I started to realize how strong they were set in stone.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I'm kind of weird, Jillian, honestly. I'm a weird guy because I always like to pay attention to different like traits that make things happen. So I'm always paying attention to the great horsemen and mulemen and women that I've been around. And humbleness is at the top. But
Yeah.
I've noticed something, and this is what's fun to talk about with somebody like you that spends so much time in the mountains. I deal with a lot of students that don't get to go outside often, meaning, they work primarily in their backyard or at the local arena or the local barn or whatever, and they don't get to go out. And kind of like, when you're at the barn or at the arena, we are kind of the top of the food chain type of thing, like
Yeah.
it's easy to be in charge. It's easy to control the controllables there.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
like you're saying, you get out on the mountain and you're not in charge anymore. You are not in charge. It's not up to you. You know, that storm rolls in, that lightning starts to crack, and that hail starts raining down on you. You're not in charge anymore. Stuff comes up, the bears, the wolves, the coyotes, the lions. I mean, all the things, right, that nature puts in front of you. And there's something about that. So I tell my students, hey, anytime you can get out on the trail, out in nature, out in the wild, do it because I think it brings about that humbleness. It changes your perspective. It makes you think differently because of it. And I think that's a
I
pretty
think
valuable
too,
thing.
it brings up, a little bit more of like a teamwork type of vibe as well with your animal. Like it can be a
Yeah.
little easy to have almost like a boss employee type of relationship when you're in an arena and you're like, I say this, you do this, like that kind of more dynamic. And once you have kind of like a common goal of like surviving and, getting home in one piece, or kind of like I think too, same thing with going out and getting cattle, and it becomes like just a partnership more between you and your equine. I think that that also goes a long ways in terms of like developing, getting people to that next level in their horsemanship or mulemanship.
So did you see a big relationship change with you and your animals
Yeah.
beginning of the trip or even before the trip
I mean,
versus when
I
you
do
get
think that was the one thing I did have going for me, with Shyla and Dakota that I took on that first Mexico to Canada ride. I'd had Shyla at that point oh for like 9 years. And I'd had Dakota, he was 7. I'd had him since the day he was born. And so I'd had them for a long time. And we had gone through, a lot of rough patches, especially being a teen and really not knowing, not being great in my horsemanship by any means. And just kind of like learning on my own and just through them giving me feedback. Like that was really my only teacher, was the two of them, basically telling me when I was screwing up and when I was like on the right track. And it was a much slower process, but they really did like make me into whatever kind of horse person I was at the time. Like all the credit went to them. I never had, after the age of like 7, I never had a formal lesson with anyone. My mom was, she was a good horsewoman, very dressage oriented, but she also had like the policy of, if I'm not at, like she was great at not giving unsolicited advice. Like that was not her MO. Like as long as I wasn't falling off the horse, she wasn't going to tell me anything. She was like, if she ever asks for my like advice, I'll give it to her. I would have asked for her advice if I had known how much there was to still learn, but being a kid, I didn't know. I thought, that I
Yep.
knew it all. And it was really once I got to college and started seeing, because again, grew up alone, had my horses in my backyard, like my bubble was tiny. I didn't see anyone else ride. Like it was just me. And I didn't even have a saddle until I was like 19 years old. I just rode around bareback everywhere. And so once I got to Cal Poly and kind of like saw these, all these women and men that are exactly my age that had a lot of skills in the arena that I didn't have, I was definitely great on trail. Like that part I had down. And I had a really good seat from riding all those years bareback, but a lot of terms of understanding about collection or having like a better feel in my hands and all of that, absolutely not. I didn't have like any of that. So, but I could see it. I could see as soon as I got to Cal Poly how much I didn't know by just watching the other riders and realizing like, oh, there's a lot I still have to learn. So that was helpful too. Kind of like again that same desire of, all right, I can see that I don't know a lot and there's a lot to learn, and I'm going to work towards getting those skills. The hard way on my own, but I'll get there eventually. So I did kind of focus on that quite a bit too in college, of like learning collection and doing a lot more arena work with Shyla and really kind of like developing that side of our skills, and that very much helped too. And then some of the horsemanship stuff, I started Dakota. He was a youngster, and we had definitely a bit of like some rough patches there, getting him going under saddle. All entirely my fault. Like I can totally see looking back in the past how he was honestly an easy colt to start. It was just me being so inexperienced and like not, setting up certain boundaries in our relationship early on, that then of course trying to like retroactively put certain things in place, makes it always harder. So he was a good colt. I was just, not as effective in my colt starting, but he taught me a lot. And just, we had a very good relationship going into the trail in terms of we were very good at communicating, very good at getting kind of through any sort of obstacle as a unit. Really very solid in that. That was like the one thing I had going for me. I was a complete, did not have skills in like every other department, but since I'd had them for 7 and 9 years, I did have a really good relationship with those two. But even so, the relationship was for sure stronger coming out of that ride, mostly too just more of like my sense, I think, too, of like wanting to be even better for them, because I felt like that first ride I pretty much got through it because of them. Like I made so many errors in terms of like not, reading the mountains right, or making like timeline decisions in terms of like, yeah, we can get over this pass in June. And like, no, we could not. Like that pass was not going to be passable for horses until like July or August. And so stuff like that, and just really feeling like we finished the ride, but I didn't have a whole big sense of kind of like accomplishment in myself, because I felt like I had made so many errors, and like basically we always just kind of got through it because I had really good horses that were trying so hard for me, and we were able to pivot and always make it work. And like, I could give my younger self like credit for that, but it was more I didn't like that I'd made the mistakes in the first place. And so there was a little bit of a sense of like, ooh, that wasn't like quite the experience I wanted. I have great horses, and like I feel like and I truly do think if I'd had, horses that I'd only known for a year, a couple months, like if you'd given me, the unbranded guys, that trained some Mustangs and they went and did a documentary and they rode Mexico to Canada, if you had given me like green started Mustangs to try to go on the Pacific Crest Trail that first year, like, oh, 100%, I would not have made it. Like, absolutely not. I only made it because I had two horses that would like jump the moon for me. Um, for sure, that was a big part of it. At least on the Pacific Crest Trail, too, the main obstacles are like down trees and snowfall. Like those are by far like my arch nemesis on like my big long trails, is like snow and down trees. Oh, like they're the ones that throw me the biggest curveballs. Overall, like at least like I know I'm going to have problems keeping weight on the horses and having to nutritionally feed them differently, but that's kind of like an obstacle I can plan for. I don't always know how the snow is going to play out, and I definitely don't know where the down trees are going to be. So those are just like
Yeah.
great, daily surprise. Um, but yeah, some very good horses. I think that's why I made it. And finishing the ride and having just that sense of accomplishment in them was great. And then when I went back and did my second Mexico to Canada ride and felt like I had learned enough from the first time, that I actually had a plan going into the second one. And I, felt like I understood the capabilities of my stock, and I understood the mountains better and how to predict the snowfall in terms of like when it was going to be clear, how to navigate around obstacles better. All of it. I felt like I handled it much better. And that second Mexico to Canada ride was really the one where I felt kind of like accomplished in myself in terms of being the partner that my horses deserved. Yeah, and from then on it was just like an addiction of sorts to go out there. Like I after that I was like, okay, good, we were successful on the second time doing the same route. Would I be successful going to a place I've never been before, and I've never seen the trail? Can I take what I've kind of like learned in terms of like the planning side of things and apply it to a trail I've never been on, and can we still be successful? And so that was kind of then like, for me, the next challenge was to then go ride places I've never been, and not have it be regress back to that first Mexico to Canada ride. And yeah, it was very transferable. So it was just like a kind of like a knowledge and experience thing that I had to kind of go through on that first ride to then be able to kind of just like understand the mountains better. Which makes sense considering I'd never ridden probably above 2,000 feet in in my life before I got on that Pacific Crest Trail.
Wow,
And then we're
you
going
really
up to
jumped
like
in.
over 13,000 feet. Like, yeah, there's only,
Yeah.
11,000 feet of elevation gain and terrain to get to learn about in that strip span.
Oh yeah, you definitely learned.
Yeah.
So tell me, so you've done the Pacific Crest Trail twice,
Yeah.
and
And
then
eventually I did it a third time in 2022. That was my most
okay,
recent one.
and then what was the other trip? Because you've been four times, right? Mexico to Canada.
Yeah, I did the Continental Divide Trail in 2018.
So that's from Arizona. You start in Arizona? Where'd you
That
start?
one starts in New Mexico. It
New
goes New
Mexico.
Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and then it kind of like skirts, back and forth along the border of Idaho and southern Montana, and then kind of like goes veers back into kind of like, Montana, and then goes up through like near like Butte, Montana, up then towards Glacier National Park. When I did it, there was a whole bunch of fires kind of in that southern Idaho, Montana area, and so I kind of took my own little path from Yellowstone until about like Butte, Montana area, and just kind of made my own little like piecemeal of trails and dirt roads to kind of like get through that part of Montana. But yeah, otherwise I was on the Continental Divide Trail for that.
That's awesome. So do you like the Pacific Crest Trail better than the Continental Divide? Do you got a favorite?
No, honestly, I think I like the Continental Divide Trail more. It took a minute. It took a minute to kind of like recalibrate my brain because like the Pacific Crest Trail was all I did first. And then I went and did all these other rides, and I didn't come back to the Pacific Crest Trail until 2022. And I don't know, there's something about it's almost like, like that first like crush that you have when you're like a teenager or something, and you just think that like they're just like this pedestal on like the top of the world. They're just so amazing. And then, maybe you run into them like a decade later after you've like, met your spouse. And then you're like, oh, you're kind of like, you're not better than anyone else. You're just kind of like a normal person. That's kind of how
Uh,
I feel about the PCT, where I was like, it was all I knew. And there's just like that certain level of just like emotional attachment from what I went through on those first two rides that like kind of like bonded me. And I see it too among hikers, long distance hikers. Like if long distance hikers, if the first trail they ever do is like the Appalachian Trail, that for them is then like the one that, they hold on kind of like a different platform than any other. And that for sure was me too for the PCT for a while until I, rode all these other trails and just because it doesn't feel the same, like it's not as emotionally charged as like that first ride or two on any of the others. I then always kind of thought, oh, the PCT I guess is just better because like that's the one where I have a deeper emotional response. And then when I went back to that trail in 2022 and was like, oh, objectively speaking, like now that I've had all these other experiences, like this is not like any better than the other trails. And I do really like being above tree line, and I do really like big open views, and you get a lot more of those, more in the Rockies than you do in especially parts of California and Oregon, where it's a lot just, and even Washington, like it's just more tree kind of cover, and I like getting above the tree line a bit more. Like I love the Sierra in California, but outside of the Sierra, it's a little bit different, and I definitely prefer overall like Colorado, Wyoming, parts of Montana, Idaho. I went to Hell's Canyon this last year for the first time, and I will be going back. I love some of that river country. I definitely want to get into the Frank Church after getting to see some of that last year. So yeah, now it's more. I still kind of realized, getting older, that for me, like the real like valuable part is just getting to kind of like explore a new country with my
yeah.
horses and like see things we haven't seen. It's also really nice to go back and visit places that I know I love, but there's just something about seeing new country and having just like that kind of little bit of like giddiness in me about like, ooh, what are we gonna like encounter? That I
Yeah.
think that's what really does it for me. So going back to the PCT for like my third Mexico to Canada ride, I didn't have any of like those kinds of feelings. It was still obviously like a great experience. I still loved it. It was just a different experience. And I think that that's just kind of like, how it goes, with getting older, like life just, your perspectives change. But I still get to kind of get like these little like shockwaves of like that giddiness when I still get to go and explore new places. And even after all these years, like there's still a lot of places that I haven't gotten to see and that I have this like little bucket list that I get to check off,
Hmm.
usually like one or two new places a year. Like I just went to the Ruby Mountains too this last summer. Loved it. They were gorgeous. Yeah, and like so experiences like that are still kind of like what does it for me, getting to go see new places.
Oh yeah. So what's the trail called that like those unbranded guys took that goes up through Arizona, Utah?
It
Um,
doesn't have a set name. They
because I
were
know
kind of
through Utah
they
it's the
were
Great
yeah.
Western
There's the
Trail.
Arizona Trail. That one's like set. Yeah, so the unbranded guys they took the Arizona Trail to, and then where it crosses into Utah, they probably overall followed like the Great Western Trail. They probably also had a few of their own things, but the Great Western Trail pretty much follows the route that they took, and then they cut back over around kind of like south of the Tetons a little bit. And then they were kind of like in that western Wyoming range and going through the Tetons. And then they cut over to pick up the Continental Divide Trail around Yellowstone. Um, and they weren't on it very long. I kind of, Ben Masters is who I asked for advice for when there was all the fires on my Continental Divide Trail, because I knew that they took a different route through southern Montana. And so I asked him, I was like, what'd you guys do through southern Montana? Because the route I want to go on is like on fire, and I'm gonna have to ride on a bunch of roads anyways. Like they had closed the trail in the national forests that I was supposed to go through, so I was gonna be road walking anyways. And that was definitely Shyla's like big weakness, was she did not like riding along roads. She didn't like the big semis like passing her. So I always try to stay off asphalt as much as possible. So I was looking to kind of like piecemeal something together that would be more enjoyable for her and me. So I called him up to ask him for some advice. And he didn't give me very detailed advice, and I'm not much of one to ask for too much help either. If it's not offered, I won't ask again. But he at least told me kind of like what national forests they did. He didn't tell me what trails they took, but what national forests and like where they kind of got back onto the Continental Divide Trail. So I assume I had a route that like followed his pretty closely, because sometimes there's only one option. So I'm sure there's times where I followed his exact route, maybe a couple times where we took slightly differences. But yeah, so then the unbranded guys would have taken kind of like this other little piecemeal route through southern Montana, and then picked up the Continental Divide Trail around you know, kind of like mid Montana ish, a little bit north of Butte. And then they followed it all the way to the Canadian border, like through the Bob Marshall and through Glacier National Park. So, yeah, for the most part, they weren't on the Continental Divide Trail too much, like a little bit, in the Yellowstone area and then northern Montana. But otherwise, they kind of like really did kind of like pick together their own route. And it's a smart route because it allows them to avoid Colorado and parts of Wyoming, where the snow doesn't melt out a lot until like sometime in July. And like they got into, kind of like the Wyoming area in early July. And that would have required, if they were on like the Continental Divide Trail, they would have had to have gotten through all of Colorado before July, which is just kind of like, it's too early most years. Like I was really lucky in my Continental Divide year. It was like the lowest snow year ever on record, at least for the last 20 years, for like southern Colorado. So the San Juan Mountains, they melted out like by sometime in June, like kind of like midish June, and so, which is crazy. Like that's a crazy early year to be able to get through the San Juans. So you every time you're trying to kind of ride a Mexico to Canada route with horses, at least on the Continental Divide Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, kind of like what we've been saying in terms of like Mother Nature kind of like sets the rules. She really, really sets the rules if you're traveling with stock, like more so than with hikers, but by far. Like you really play by the rules that are set for you when you're traveling with stock. And there's lots of years where it just really isn't feasible unless you basically, do huge hundreds and hundreds of miles of detour to kind of do those Mexico to Canada rides with horses. Like you kind of do have to play your cards right and go on a basically like at the very least an average year, but typically more of like a drought year for at least like the kind of like the Sierra and Colorado if you're going northbound, to be able to like actually make it through those those areas in those years. So yeah, it's I usually don't tell anyone that I'm trying to do a Mexico to Canada ride because I'm always worried that like winter is gonna, embarrass me and make people be like, oh, just kidding, can't go. We got a lot of snow this year. So I usually kind of like, keep tight lips until about March when I've kind of seen how much snow has fallen. And then I'm like, okay, yep, I'm gonna try to go this year. But yeah, because I don't want to have to be caught backpedaling. So I usually stay pretty quiet. But the route that the unbranded guys took was a really smart route because they didn't have to go through Colorado, and then going through Utah was a lot lower elevation, and it like really increased their chances of they're trying to film a documentary. Obviously, they can't just like wait until March to decide like, okay, guys, we're gonna go. So it was a really smart plan of theirs to do the route they did. And Ben Masters, he had ridden like 2,000 miles on the Continental Divide Trail a couple years prior, and so he kind of like knew how, and he was doing elk hunts and stuff out there, so he knew the Rockies really well. And yeah, I think he was very intelligent about understanding you know like the weather and the snow situation is like a little too big of a variable if we're trying to like make sure that we're going to film a documentary. Whereas if they did the route they did going through, especially Utah, it allows them to have a lot more options, and just kind of how Utah is in terms of there's such a strong dirt road network. There's a lot of ways to get across Utah and not have to be on pavement and to be on more trail and dirt roads just from the amount of public land that's out there. So it was, I think, a really good choice in terms of allowing them to do that. And also the route they got to take through Western Wyoming was really pretty. So that
Yeah.
was also a great bonus.
Utah, the hard part about that's where I live is Utah. Hard part
Yeah.
about Utah is water. So
Yeah.
there's yeah, Utah, we have over 70% of the state as public lands.
Yeah. It's a very,
But how
very,
much of that is actually like accessible? Oh boy, it's tough just because of water.
yeah.
So there's so many places that I would love to ride. Just like, oh, I would love to go spend a week out there. But you just have to haul so dang much water to do
I do a
it.
lot of water caches when I'm riding through. Like I rode through Utah too in 2019, and overall southern Utah like had more water than I expected just because of like kind of like the cattle. And I would pretty
Yeah.
much rely on basically camping by like a cattle trough for a lot of
Yep.
water. It was kind of the same in the Continental Divide Trail in New Mexico. You rely in large stretches almost exclusively on like cattle water, which is not the prettiest water. It's like all sorts of like nice colors and like
Hmm.
floaters going on in there, but your expectations go down a lot when you're on these like desert rides. But yeah, I would drop water caches on like my day off because I would always have a truck and a trailer, like usually two of them, so I could resupply. And I'd kind of do this like leapfrog style where if I'm going Mexico to Canada, let's say hypothetically, if I have two rigs, it always takes two people to set up. So usually my mom would kind of come out with me when I'm getting started at the border, and we would leave one rig just like empty down by like the Mexican border. And then, I would take my mom, she'd hop in my truck, I'd take her to the nearest airport, she flies back home. And then me and the horses would go and get like on trail at a trailhead up ground, like mile 100 or something. And then we would ride south to mile 0. And then we'd get to that trail, where that truck and trailer was, load up. We could go into a town for a couple days, resupply. If it was like in the desert area, I would usually find like a fairgrounds or something where I could put the horses, during the day. And then during the day, I would go out and like anywhere where there was like real big dry stretches, I would drop water caches, and I would have these like 5-gallon collapsible jugs, and I would drop, 15, 20 gallons at like a road crossing that then we would basically have to camp by in order to have like guaranteed water for the night. Um, and then we'd like when we'd be riding through. So after I drop my little water caches, get back to the horses the next day, drive up, to mile like 200 or what have you, and then get on trail there and ride south to mile 100. And so we'd kind of do this like this leapfrog thing where I'm
Yeah.
doing
So
sections of the trail
yeah.
northbound, but I'm riding each section southbound. But it would
So you
allow
did,
me to be like a really self-contained little unit where
yeah.
I can then drop my own water caches. And then when we're riding through, because they're collapsible, I can just pack them up and put them in the top pack of my pack horse. I don't have to go back out there and pick them up. But I liked that setup a lot because I was just so self-contained. I could be my own resupply person. we needed to go to a farrier or a vet on our days off, I had transportation. A lot of the places where I'm riding through, like that, they don't actually go through towns. It's pretty much they're staying on the public land, and then 10, 20, 30 miles away from some road crossing is the town that's got like a population of 50 or something. It's a teeny tiny town. There's not going to be probably a feed store in said town. So having the vehicle access really made the logistics of doing kind of these like remote rides really possible, but especially in the desert where I would be dropping like water caches throughout Southern California. When I did my Arizona ride, when I rode through Utah for the southern part, I dropped a lot of water caches, New Mexico. Yeah, all of those kind of like southern desert states. I was really big on dropping water caches in order
That's
to make
smart.
it through. Because yeah, they are. There's times, at least on certain maps, like going through Utah, you didn't have this kind of resource, but for New Mexico, Arizona, and California, they have like apps that you can use for the trail. And they have kind of like crowdsourced info on it where people will basically give you updates on the water sources. So you can check the water sources, and like there'll be comments that'll basically tell you, yep, the water source is dry or it's still flowing. So it's really nice, that extra peace of mind of like, okay, I know there'll be water here because Joe Schmo said so like 2 days ago. Or I know there's no water there, so I'm gonna like need to like plan for it. But it would make it a little easier to strategize and not just kind of like play conservatively when you could like have that kind of like updated info for those places. And there'd be times on the PCT where it's like, that there's a 40-mile stretch that has zero water. So you're like, okay, I need to plan for that. But at least it made it a little more concrete. Like Utah was the last one that I rode in terms of out of all those states. And I kind of did it last specifically because I was concerned about the water and not having that. Like all I had for Utah was topo maps. So like, okay, you see the blue line on the map, that doesn't mean there's going to be water at said blue line when you get there, especially in
Probably not.
Utah.
So
So
where
yeah,
did you go in Utah? What was your route through
I was
Utah?
following the Great Western Trail through most of there. I deviated a little bit to eventually go over towards the Uintas and ride through the Uintas, but most of it I was taking like the Great Western Trail through that area.
So did you where'd you start at?
I started near Kanab, where like the Arizona Trail basically meet. I wanted to ride from the Grand Canyon to the Wyoming border. That was kind of like my route. So I
Sweet.
started like the south rim of the Grand Canyon, took the Arizona Trail over to where it hit kind of like the Utah border, or just before the Utah border, and then I kind of like deviated a teeny bit west, and but for the most part up north through like kind of like the Great Western Trail, and picked it up. Like was followed it. It went just a little bit west of like Bryce Canyon. No, no, east. I went east of Bryce Canyon, went up through like Dixie National Forest, and kind of like, just east of like basically the 15, and kind of like those
Yeah.
mountains and like the Wasatch Mountains. And
Yeah, you probably rode right past my house.
oh, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that would have
So
been funny.
did you take the Skyline Drive?
I
Did you ride?
did. I
Yep. So
did take
that's
Skyline. Yeah.
that's right above where I live. I live in Spring City.
Oh, that's
So
hilarious. What a
yeah.
small world.
Yeah. So when you probably went around the Horseshoe Mountain there and all that. And anyways, that's my country. So
Yeah, I was
that's
up there.
pretty
It was a
cool.
high snow year when I did that route. So ironically, I had snow problems in Utah, whereas like
Oh
usually
yeah.
Utah is like, oh, you'll be fine. But it was like 2019, and so it was a mega snow year that year. So there was a couple times
Oh yeah.
on Skyline where I was having to like come down off of it because there was just like the snow drifts at some spots were just like too much. It was very satisfying though because there was no quads or anything up there. Like I passed a couple
Hmm.
quads early on when I was climbing up, but they couldn't get through like some of the snow drifts, and I was like, ha ha ha! Like the real 4-wheel drive is here. Like
Yeah.
that's how it's done.
Well, you've talked about water challenges and snow and deadfall. Like what else did you run into for challenges? Any-
Um,
What was
Probably the big.
what were some hard stuff or some hard times?
Oh man, there's plenty of them. Obviously, getting any kind of injury on your stock is a real curveball. It doesn't even have to be a big injury. I never had on my Mexico to Canada rides like a big injury, but it would be something silly like they got a puncture wound near the coronet band going over some downfall, and 2 days later their leg is getting hot and starting to like swell, and you're like, okay, now, I'm getting to the trailer and then I'm gonna have to immediately find a vet on a Saturday. And like, how long are we gonna be sidelined until like the infection clears and the wound heals? Um, Things like that. Like losing shoes can always be a fun one. I don't tack on my own shoes mostly because I at least for those big long rides, I noticed that like the more holes that went in my horse's hoof, then just like the instability and the more likely they were to lose shoes. So I tried really hard to not just do like a tack on job myself. Like if I was a really skilled farrier, I would do my own hoof care, but that takes obviously thousands of hours to get to like a truly like good level. And I felt like I didn't want to just do like a hack job on them. So I always carried hoof boots with me, but there'd be times where I would lose like 6 out of our 8 shoes. Like when we be like right when we're getting ready to like have that cycle and like get new shoes in the next town is when we lose like 6 shoes in some nonsense area. And I remember like it was like it's usually of course like the day you're coming into to the trailer. But I remember I got like one of my horses. I didn't have quite enough hoof boots. I had like 4 hoof boots. And we lost 6 shoes, and he got like a stone bruise, and then that was like turning into an abscess. But like I was on my Continental Divide trail, and I was like waylaid for a couple days like trying to like get him patched up because we had to go through like the Bob Marshall, and I needed a pack horse to get through that area. So even like silly things like that, like something you don't think of as being significant, like, oh, he got a stone bruise, like that's not a big deal. It is. It is when you don't have a lot of horses and they're all you got. And winter comes so hard and fast in high elevation areas that you really do have this like deadline that you're trying to make. Like when I finished my ride in Glacier, it was like September 17th and like snow was coming down. And it was only a couple days later that then they closed like the high elevation like trails that I was taking to get over because of the snow, and like several hikers that were behind me had to like road walk the rest of the way to the Canadian border just because of the Glacier National Park kind of like closing their trail access because of the snowfall. So you do have these like tight deadlines. So when you're running up right against it and your horses get like some minor injury that takes like a week to heal, you're like biting your nails of like, oh my gosh, if I like make it within like 50 miles of the border and get snowed out, like it's gonna be devastating. So yeah, you have things like that a lot. I haven't had too many wild animal problems, thankfully. I've had like one nosy black bear in the Sierra. That was it. I haven't had any like close grizzly encounters in terms of like my camps with the horses. I've seen grizzlies when I'm riding, but I haven't had one come in my camp, which I'm very thankful for, and I hope it never happens. I hope I never have a grizzly come in my camp. I think that's probably my biggest fear is having that situation, and it hasn't happened. I do think I'm fortunate because these are really high elevation routes, and so like I talk about snow coming really early, but that's really only because of how high up I am on a lot of these
Yeah.
routes. Obviously, hunting season doesn't really like kick off until kind of September, and I do think that like the grizzlies, because they're also kind of putting on weight for the winter, obviously, and they've really kind of figured out that like hunting season in like when they hear those shots, like they I think are a lot more aggressive and a lot more of a nuisance to hunters than I've ever had to deal with. So I'm very fortunate. I do think that like if you're hunting, wild animal encounters like black bears and especially grizzlies are a much bigger like thing than what I've had to deal with when I'm there, not during kind of like their final push for winter. I'm there kind of early by their standards, and I'm not hunting, so I'm not ringing any sort of dinner bells. So for the most part, I feel like I'm pretty lucky that like my bear encounters are very very chill. They're usually scared. Normally, all I see is a little fluffy butt as it's running away from me. Um, so that's been chill. I had a wolf in my camp on the CDT. That was exciting. Like I woke up just to get up and water my horses on the high line and like unzipped my tent, and I had like my headlight on a kind of like a low setting. And as I unzip it, there's like 2 eyes like reflecting at me. And I've seen a lot of eyes at this point, and so I'm just like usually they're cows. But I'm like, okay, it's probably a deer, and I like turn on like the full brightness, and then it's like, oh no, it's like a wolf, like right there outside my tent. That was a big surprise. And the horses didn't even seem to like clock it as being a wild animal. I think that they thought it was like a dog. because they were both like still, half asleep on the high line, and there's like a wolf in our camp. And he just kind of like, made eye contact for a couple more seconds and then just like super nonchalantly just like turned and like jogged off. And I'm just like sitting there in my tent, like, oh my God. I've always thought that my horses would like tell me when there's something exciting in camp, because normally they're telling me when there's a moose in camp, when there's cows in camp, when there's wild horses, when there's bear. They tell me, they wake me up. And they didn't tell me anything about this wolf. They were completely useless. I don't think Carly would have done that. I think Carly would have told me. Carly's very vocal about anytime something like comes anywhere near our camp, usually very dramatically so. Yeah, so I feel like probably Carly would have told me about a wolf at our camp, but my horses did not. They were completely just like, oh, that's a
Yeah.
dog. We see those all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So who knows how many wolves have apparently come into my
Yeah.
camp? That was just the one I happened to catch randomly. So maybe there's been a lot more wolves in my camp than I've ever been aware of.
Oh, they're pretty stealthy. They're pretty
Yeah,
stealthy, so it wouldn't
very.
surprise
I
me.
never heard one howl that close. I heard some in Yellowstone, but they were a long ways off. But I never heard one like howl close to my camp. So
Hmm.
it never even occurred to me. And like I would see footprints, especially in the Bob and in Glacier. You see so many like evidence, in the Bob, I'll see a lot of wolf prints, a lot of bear prints, a lot of scat. And in Glacier, you see so many grizzly prints and so much scat, more in that area of where I've ridden than anywhere else. I know they're around just by how much evidence is. Like when I'm in like the Wind River range and stuff, like I don't ever see grizzly prints. And I've had friends that have seen grizzly in like the Wind River range, but like I almost never see any kind of like evidence of them. So they're obviously just a lot lower population density. Definitely a lot more like over in like the Cody, Wyoming area. But it's interesting. You can kind of tell when you need to be a little bit more on guard by just like how much footprints and scat you're seeing. But I am lucky with just the time of year that I tend to be traveling through. They're usually pretty willing to give me like a wide berth and not really mess with me much. So I do think my timing for these rides is a big factor in that.
Oh yeah. What about um what about running into people? Do you have pretty good experiences with all the people you ran into
I
on the
do, yeah.
trail?
I've only ever had like one bad experience, and it was like a fellow like hiker and was on the Pacific Crest Trail a couple years ago. But for the most part, like all like the locals that I've ever met, like honestly, those are like one of my favorite people to run into are like the locals that I get to meet, especially in like Utah. I was going through like kind of like by a lot of ranches and had like people willing just to like host me for the night or at the very least like want me to stop in and have like a soda and some food. Like very, very nice people. Um, but I feel like too with the horses, sometimes you kind of have to rely on like the local community. Like they're like with the trailer setup that I have, I'm pretty darn self-sufficient. But there's still times where I needed like a place to stay to like, just have a base camp for a little while riding off and dropping my water caches. And like locals were always incredibly nice. Yeah, just really, really nice people. A lot of people on the PCT on my first ride, when I did not have a two trailer setup and I was having all sorts of problems. I had all sorts of really nice people that just like would host me for even up to a week while I'm trying to kind of like get my bearings and get myself together. Amazingly nice people. But yeah, the only real confrontation I ever had was with like a hiker, and he was clearly just wanting to kind of like pull a power trip. And like we were on a really steep drop off portion of a trail and we were traveling the same direction, but he had stopped for a snack like right in the middle of the trail, as a lot of unfortunately hikers will sometimes do on these like Mexico to Canada rides. I haven't seen it on the CDT, and I didn't see it so badly on the PCT until the 2022 ride. Um, but there's sometimes seems to be this mentality. There's so many hikers now on these long distance trails that there's almost like a little bit like a mob mentality of like, oh, we like own the trail a little bit. And just like certain kind of like courtesy seems to have just like whoosh right over their head in terms of trail etiquette. So he'd stopped in the very middle of the trail and his backpack all over the trail, blah, 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 and was eating lunch or snacks. And I came around the corner and, like was just like, hey, so sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind like just moving your stuff off so we can like scoot by? And he like didn't really move his backpack. He kind of like moved himself a little bit, but his phone was still right in the middle of the trail and like his backpack. And I just like was like, you might want to grab your stuff. Like, I don't want to like be responsible for breaking your phone. And it was just like that. That's kind of like a trigger. He was just waiting for something to like trigger him. I just ran into him at the trailhead and just that immediate vibe of just the way that he had asked for some question to me at the trailhead. And it just, I clocked him of like, oh, please don't go the direction I'm going down the trail. And he did. And I was like, I hope I don't run into him at that steep drop off section because I could just tell he was going to be the type that wasn't going to want to yield out of the trail for whatever nonsense reason. So it was played out exactly that way. Yeah, it was just ridiculous because he was going the same direction I was, and I was telling him because then he didn't want to move and he didn't want to move his stuff, and now he was on the uphill side of me. And once he was getting really aggressive, I was like, I'm normally fine with hikers passing or getting over whatever side they want as long as my stock seemed to be comfortable. Obviously, once he was being really aggressive, I was like, okay, well, now I'm not cool with you being on the uphill side of me. Like, now I want you on the downhill side of me. So then that was a whole,
Oh
just
no.
like basically trading words for 10 minutes about like who's going to yield to who and on what side of the trail. And I kept telling him, I was like, if you don't like it, just keep going down the trail. You're going that way anyways. Like, you can go as far as you want until you find a place that you feel comfortable at. Like, you don't have to step off of a cliff. Yeah, it was just nonsense. There was no logic involved in it. But yeah, so that was about the only kind of like ridiculous interaction I had. And I think it was mostly just him. You could even just tell by his like aesthetic looks, like everything was like written all over him from head to toe that he was just like, a walking insecure idiot.
Mm.
But yeah,
It's
one
interesting.
out of like thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
Pretty good odds. And if anything, I think being out there kind of like reinvigorates my faith in humanity because there
Yeah.
are so many kind people and so many just acts of kindness and generosity that I feel like I've gotten to be the beneficiary of. It's really honestly amazing the kind of people that are out there, especially horse people. Horse people kind of understand sometimes the level of just like logistics that are involved with it, and they will like move mountains to help you. The way that I think sometimes non-horse people like they sometimes want to be helpful, but they just don't understand always what kind of effort you need. Whereas like a horse person, they can do the math and they can realize like, oh, this would actually be helpful. Like I've had people that just like messaged me through social media that are like, if you're in the area and you need any help, let us know. And I had like two flat tires one time right when I got to the trailhead. And I messaged these people and they're like, we got it. They went out to my trailer, took my tires off my trailer, took them to a repair shop, got the tires repaired, and then put them back on my trailer all while I was out riding. Like people
Nice.
I'd never met before. Like that is beyond generously kind. And
Mhm.
same thing too, if I've had like vehicle breakdowns and random people, like I have a satellite device and I'll text my mom and be like, the truck's broken down, like I can't get anywhere. And she'll call like, because she has in cell service at home, she'll call like the local vet in like the nearby community and get like, or the feed store, some sort of like horsey establishment, and then kind of like get, she'll find someone then that's then willing to come out with their truck like out to the trailhead because you can't call AAA to come pick up your truck and trailer and two horses. So then she'll
Mhm.
send some nice stranger out there, to come pick me up from the trailhead, and we'll like have to like undo the truck and like pull the truck forward, hook up their truck to my trailer and put my horses in the back and then go back down the mountain. Like that's an insane, that's hours and hours of effort. And now then they're hosting me and my horses at their house. Like it's an incredible amount of effort and generosity that any normal person would not like think to even offer. But horse people will understand how much is kind of like involved with traveling with horses. And if it weren't for them, like those messes that I occasionally get into would be like so much more catastrophic, or at the very least very inconvenient. And yeah, kindness of like complete strangers are the things that absolutely save me in that moment.
Oh yeah, there's so many good people out there. When we're traveling around doing our clinics and stuff, we've found that, if you watch the news too much, it looks like the
Yeah.
world hates everybody. But when you actually get out there in the real world, there's a lot of good people. I
Yeah, like
just
I
had
said,
a
all the
I
best
just
are what I've had.
do you know who Bernie Harberts is?
No, I don't.
So he's another long rider. He's rode like his most recent trip was from North Carolina to Idaho.
Oh, nice.
And anyways, I had him on the show a little while back.
Did he
And
travel with mules or would he
yeah,
travel?
yep,
Nice.
two mules.
Oh, great.
And he's talking about the same thing, and he mostly took roads. So his, you
Yeah.
know, going from east to west, I mean, you're pretty much gonna be riding on a road. It's
I know
it's
people
not.
always ask me, "Are you gonna do a coast to coast ride?" And I'm like, I don't think so, because for me, the backcountry is like what
Yeah,
calls me. It's not the distance or the miles that honestly does it for me. That's not what matters. It's the route itself
yeah,
that I find like to be what I'm after. And so yeah, coast to coast ride. Yeah, unfortunately, kind of like what you were saying, if you're going to east and west traveling, you're going to be pretty much on roads. There's no like trail that really travels that way.
yeah. And because of that, he pretty much had to stay at somebody's house
Yeah.
or farm or ranch or something every night.
Yeah.
Because he refused to stay on just the side of the road, because
Yeah.
these highways. He's like, I'm not going to stay on the side of a highway with my mules.
I know. It's like
So
being a traveling bum at that point.
he only got turned down like a time or two, he said, all
Ah,
the way across. He said most everybody that he asked would say yes. And he
yeah.
got pretty good at who he asked. He could kind of read the atmosphere, read the room, so to speak, right? Like,
Yeah.
these people will probably say yes. These people will probably say no,
Yeah.
right?
You
So
can kind of like read the room. I've had that happen a couple times too, where I've had to like stay with someone, or sometimes too, I have been coming into a town that I didn't know where I was going to stay. And I remember one time as I was crossing a road, they were just some guys working on a telephone pole. And like, they basically like, one guy like asked, he's like, do you need anything? As I'm like crossing the highway and I'm like, not right here. But I was like, oh, but like in a couple days, I'm getting to this town. If you know anyone that would host me, that'd be great. And he's like, I'll get your phone number and I'll make some calls. And like, yeah, by the time I came into that town a couple days later, he had found somewhere for me to stay, and just like incredibly nice stuff like that. It's kind of mind blowing. But yeah, reading the room is a thing for sure. Being able to try to like figure out, it helps a lot if there's like a horse on the property. You're like, okay, that person will probably
yeah,
say yes and take me in. It's a little harder if you're having to ask people that don't have horses. But I've had it happen. I've had nice people that have zero horses on their property, like put me and my horses in their backyard. There was a fun couple in California that hosted me one night, and they were out there in the morning with me. I didn't want my horses like trouncing around their backyard and like destroying the place. So I was picking weeds and grass by hand the next morning, and the couple saw me out there and they came out and were then picking weeds and grass with me to feed my horses. Just super funny, nice things like that. Like make me a pancake breakfast before they set me off on trail. Just and really nice people.
that's
Yeah, reading the
awesome.
room is definitely a skill if you're traveling by road, and being able to like, it's a much bigger human component. Like for me, they're usually random nice acts of kindness, or really bailing me out of a bad situation. Like it's like those two extremes are kind of where I'm at with my human interactions. Not so much the daily interactions that for sure that gentleman would have had on his like route for just being in a more, human travel in terms of the roads.
Yeah. So what were some of your best highlights of these trips? Like, were there moments that you're like, oh man, this is what I've lived for? I imagine you've seen a bunch of sunsets and sunrises that were probably
Yeah.
awesome, and all that kind of stuff. But what were some of your favorite things? Or do you remember favorite moments or stories?
Yeah. Some of my favorite moments. There's always this one that stands out. I was in Washington in the Goat Rocks Wilderness, and it had been kind of like a socked-in day. And this was on my second Mexico to Canada ride, and I was coming to this section of trail called Knife's Edge. That is like pretty nerve wracking. But it's also a really beautiful stretch, and it was so socked in that like I had like maybe 30 feet of visibility as I started to get up towards this ridge line. I was kind of bummed because usually you can see like clear across to Mount Rainier on one side and Mount Adams on the other. It's just like insane views, and so I was pretty bummed as I'm like coming up because it's just getting more and more and more socked in with like cloud. And then at one point, as I'm along, like traversing the spine, the clouds just kind of like drop. and it become and like and the sun is shining and like it's blue sky above me, but now the clouds are basically below me, and it felt like I was on an island, and then the only thing I could see was like my little ridgeline spine, Mount Rainier, like another not quite 100 miles away as the crow flies, and then like Mount Adams. And that was just like these three islands. It was like, it just felt like a sea of clouds. It was just this very just like awe, moment, like where you pause everything you're doing and you just like watch basically the sunset go down. Like those just moments that take your breath away are very big. Same with riding in Glacier National Park. Riding through Glacier National Park the first time really just blew my mind that a place could exist that's that stunning. It happens quite often. Like anytime that like I'm just in a place where I can't quite fathom that it can be this incredible and like look this beautiful. Those are those are the moments for sure that I'm chasing when I'm out there. Same thing with riding through Hell's Canyon this last fall. I thought the like going along the Snake River was like the prettiest river that I've ever like gotten to ride along. Like the Grand Canyon, stunning in terms of certain parts of it, but in terms of like being at the bottom along the river, like the Snake was like so much cooler than the Grand Canyon in that element. So yeah, I there's definitely anything like that is what I'm trying to chase when I'm going out there on these rides for sure.
Oh yeah, those special moments. That's why I love the backcountry so much. Just those, and it's hard to describe it, and it's hard to say what you're feeling.
It's really hard. And I think that was the thing that like got me hooked from that first ride is again, I'd never been in the mountains. I had never been above 2,000 feet with a horse at least, until I went out there. And like my conception of like what the world looked like and what it existed was apparently tiny. And in terms of like how beautiful it was. And I wasn't on social media. I didn't have any even idea of like what the backcountry looked like. I had nothing. I had no reference point. Like social media now kind of lets us virtually see what's out there in the world and experience the world, but especially if you had existed in a time before social media was really such a thing, you kind of like the only world you experienced really was the one you saw with your own eyeballs, like that was the world. And that's how it was for me when I then went into the backcountry for the first time. My eyeballs had never seen anything that like an alpine lake or getting above tree line or standing on top of a 12,000-foot pass. Like, absolutely not. So, all those experiences, it just literally blew my mind in terms of just how beautiful our world was, and especially the backcountry. And it's really a unique feature, too, especially in the United States, to have the kind of like trail network that we do and the public land access that we do. I never realized what a unique feature it is of like our country and how fortunate we are to have trail access, and that's so stock accessible as well. Like we are incredibly lucky. Like, and I never even realized that I had like won the lottery, by like having horses and living in the United States and having all those opportunities. Never even knew it, didn't know it was like such an advantage until I started getting out there. And then like you just start to realize like, wow, I am so lucky. And I think that's a big part too of like enjoying life is being able to like understand kind of like how fortunate we are in certain areas. And
Yeah.
getting out there with my horses really like put that in perspective for me.
So how has your horsemanship changed? Speaking of them,
Oh
like
man, a
from
lot,
that first trip
thankfully.
to now, like what have
Yeah.
you improved on? What are you doing different?
Groundwork was not a thing that existed in my world until
Yeah.
sometime in my 20s. So absolutely kind of like getting incorporating groundwork and understanding how getting, kind of like into their mind and getting it down into their feet and like from the ground greatly makes life easier when you're under saddle, and just having it's all about communication and having like a good common language and being able to read. I think that for me is a big part of it is being able to read my horse and understand like where there's tension, where they're bracing, when their brain isn't with me, or that's showing up in their feet, whatever that disconnect is, and how can we remedy it and connect in order to then you know when we need to have that solid communication under saddle, it's there, and that tool is like easily accessible. That's like really the big thing. Like I think it's easy when you're kind of going from that transition of like I know nothing to then you're watching all these videos and you're going to clinics and you're trying to gather all these tools. it's almost easy to get a little bit like lost in terms of like you almost think of like all these different exercises as being stuff that you have to like memorize. But really what it comes down to is just like, are you and your horse like or mule speaking a similar language? And are you building that like dialogue in which you can always kind of like communicate? And equestrians in general, it's a really kind of weird thing. Like there's no other animal in which you have like such a physical language with. And so it takes time to kind of like build that physical language, especially for us. Like building a feel, I think is a huge thing. Like I didn't have a feel, in my hands, or like just, that's been a big part for me in my like development as an equestrian, is having a much better feel in my hands, and like what kind of like softness am I looking for, and then in their body, in terms of that always translating to their mind. Yeah, that's been a big part of it. Carly takes a lot of credit for like forcing me to have to really like exercise that muscle.
Good.
I definitely felt like I started at 0 or lower when she came into my life, because she had been like lightly backed, she had been sat on, but steering and brakes were completely not installed in her when I got her. So, and she was 7, so she was older, and she's a draft mule, and so her neck is like the size of a horse's body, like it's so big, and so like she's so much stronger. I've never felt so humbled by an animal as I was by Carly, in terms of feeling like a little kid again, where you're just being dragged by your pony. Like that was like completely the adult version of like me being with Carly. It was like, oh man, I have like no say in the matter.
Mhm.
So I really had to, because there was just no overpowering Carly. There was no muscling my way around her. So I completely had to find a way to like get to her brain in order to get to her feet. Like, I feel like horses give us a lot of grace, and horses can sometimes be so eager to please that even when we're kind of like, subpar in our horsemanship, we can get a lot done with some of these just like golden retriever horses. And mules, they want to please, and they're good animals, but they don't feel this, they're not such kind of like doormats as like a horse can be, where they'll just like give it up to you. Like they want, like they're like, they're always analyzing. Like, are you actually smarter than me? Do you actually have good ideas? Would I actually listen to you? Or is that going to get me in trouble? Like they have that like extra element of critical thinking that holds you to a much higher standard in terms of like your
Yeah.
leadership and communication.
I tell my students, mules just want to know why.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
whatever you want to do, they'll do it for you, but you need to answer why first.
Yeah.
Why should
Yeah.
I do that?
Yeah, and
That's
sometimes too, I can tell too if Carly's like not on board with like what our plan is. Like I've gotten good at being able to pick it up a lot earlier on, and realize that then it's not about like trying to then double down on like doing it my way. I'm like, okay, clearly I need to have like a different approach to getting her to understand what I want. And so yeah, it's more just like exercising your brain too, in terms of how can I think about problem solving in a different way that explains it to this animal that I can't, verbally communicate to what I want, and how it's not a bad idea, and how I do have their best interests at heart. Yeah, it's like mules definitely. You usually don't have to answer, like you said, with horses. A lot of the times, that why, like them just wanting to please and you saying it is kind of like enough. But yeah, for mules, there's a much higher threshold that they're like, you're gonna have to like explain to me. I always heard that saying, like mules want to see your resume, for like why they should listen to you. And until I got a mule, I really didn't understand like what that meant. And like I would have mule people try to explain it to me, but until I got a mule, I really didn't understand how quite it all came together. But yeah, now I'm also now one of these cliche mule people that says things like that, like mules just want to see your resume.
my favorite quote is, "You have to treat the mule the way you should treat the horse." Tom
Yeah,
Dorrance said
yeah, it's a
that.
good one too that I hear a lot. But again, if
Mhm.
you have only ever dealt with horses, and again, it's kind of like that same thing where, your world only exists as far as kind of like you've experienced or you've seen, and it's really hard for us as humans to, I think, conceptualize outside of that. And so yeah, until you kind of like start getting like, doing it and getting your feet wet in whatever area it is that you have yet to experience or grow in, it's very hard to like accurately conceptualize something. That's how I felt even going into the Pacific Crest Trail. Like I knew I had never ridden in the backcountry. I knew that I didn't know anything. And so I honestly tried to not even imagine it because I was like, whatever it is that I come up with, it's going to be so far off base that then it's going to almost be harder to try to like recalibrate my brain to then be like, oh, this is what's actually happening and this is what it's actually like. So I was trying to keep it as blank of a slate as possible. I think can go with that. I think same thing with horses and mules. People will sometimes make all these preconceived ideas of like
Yeah.
what it means to like work with mules. And if anything, I think that sets them up for more failure because then it's harder to like then like wipe that preconception away and actually be able to receive like the actual information that we're getting. I had that same problem too. Like I was constantly being told, but even when I was like mule shopping by the mule owners about like, oh, they'll never forget. If you like do one thing wrong, they're gonna come back 20 years and they're gonna like seek
I hate that.
vengeance on you. That's the strangest. That's by far the strangest thing, especially
It's a,
after like meeting mules.
yeah.
I've heard like Carly doesn't have a vengeance bone in her
Yeah,
body.
I hate that so bad. And
It's
luckily
really
now there's
strange to
some
me
cool,
coming from people that own mules, but I definitely
yeah.
don't. If a mule person is saying that, I don't really consider them too much of a mule person.
Yeah. Well, usually I ask them, what are you doing to that poor thing that it's never going to forgive you?
Yeah,
But
yes.
then I
And
go on to say,
oh,
like the mule's just not, they're literally not capable of that. They
yeah.
don't have that large frontal lobe. Their frontal lobe is just a little tiny. They don't have that big frontal
Yeah, they
lobe.
are like they think things
Can't
through,
do
but it's
it.
always in the moment, and like they can be very like overall reactive with just like the mindset of self-preservation. But
Yeah.
yes, this idea of them being calculated and waiting for their
Yeah.
moment in 20 years to seek vengeance is like very, yeah,
Yeah, it's
very,
just uneducated because they literally can't do that.
yeah.
Have you ever read Evidence-Based Horsemanship by Steve Peters and Martin Black?
I haven't read all of it, but I've read good parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, Steve's going to be on the show. He's not coming on until June, but Steve's going to come on the show and we're going to talk about that kind of stuff with the mule. So it'll be fun. But
I will
I've
be.
been a
Yeah.
long time student of his, and he's putting all those dumb myths to bed. There's just
Thank goodness. It's amazing how they keep cropping up, and it happens in all areas of horsemanship. Like you always hear too about like mares being like extra this or that, and like I like mares. I ride a lot of mares. I also have good geldings, and like my gelding Dakota is by far the most dramatic of all my horses. Like if someone's gonna have like a drama queen moment, it's gonna be my gelding Dakota, and that's just his personality. It has nothing to do with him being a boy or a girl. But yes, anything like that, any kind of just stereotype with breeds as well. A lot of breed stereotypes I don't think are earned. I feel like you should always just evaluate the individual that you have in front of you, because that's all it comes down to is horses have their own personalities and their own quirks or their own holes in their education. And rather than trying to fit them into some sort of box, just like evaluate the individual in front of you to before
yeah.
proceeding. Yeah, I think that's
So
an issue in the horse culture is, and I think
yeah.
it's a human culture trait too, to try to put things in little boxes before you've ever even like evaluated it. Yeah, I think that's a hard thing for human nature to come over.
Yeah, it is. It is. But you get better at communicating with people. Like because I hear so many things. You can only imagine how much stuff I hear. And you know, you just
Especially
have
about
to consider it like with their education level. So the people that are saying these things, I treat them just the same way as I treat the mules. So because if the mule's looking at that tarp, they're sitting there looking at that tarp or that stump or whatever, and all they have is that little tiny bit of information, their preconceived notion that the tarp is going to kill them, the stump is going to kill me, right? Or
yeah.
the person's preconceived notion about this little information about a mule. You have to just take it like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but there's more to learn here.
I feel like this is like such like a horse person thing to say. How do I take like all of the ways I talk to animals and like apply it to my human life? It's like even with like parenting and a lot of parents I know that like are
Yep.
avid equestrians, like they basically take their horsemanship skills and they like apply it to their child rearing. I feel like a normal person, if they were overhearing this conversation, would be like, you can't treat people like you do mules. But little do they know.
It
There's a
turns
lot of
out you can.
commonalities. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So far I've raised my kids that way. So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure my wife practices that stuff on me too. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
yeah,
works. It's a very like, useful tool across all aspects of life to
that's
practice
right.
horsemanship and mulemanship.
Well, speaking of learning things, you have some online courses and stuff too. You want to tell my listeners about that? Because it looks
Yeah,
like I was
sure.
exploring it this morning on your website. Your website's gillianlarson.net, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's pretty cool. You got a lot of cool stuff going on. So you're teaching people how to plan for backcountry trips and how to pack and what to do. And I mean, you go into in depth all the way down to like the nutrition of for your horses and your mules and stuff. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I said, kind of like my first experiences going in the backcountry was a lot by like trial by fire, and a lot of mistakes were made, and then having to kind of, figure it out. And I really obviously wanted there to be more resources available to people that were kind of like me, especially private stock use. There's quite a few like clinics and workshops out there where you can learn how to pack, especially if you're kind of wanting to be like an outfitter or work for an outfitter, where you can get those skills in terms of how to pack out different kind of loads and learn different hitches. But there seemed to really be a lack of, how do you go riding somewhere that you've never been, and like how do you read the maps to know what campsites are good? How do you go about the permitting process if you're somewhere where there's permits? How do you know the time of year to go ride? Like all those little things that I definitely had to learn the hard way. I just wanted there to be more of a resource available. And I try really hard to not set like a prescription. I feel like everyone, based on their resources and their goals, can have a kind of like varied setup or system that works best for them. And so I try to really present things in a, if this is what you have and this is what your goals are, how can we cater that to make it a successful trip for you to go out in the backcountry and achieve those goals, whether it's like going out on an overnight or you're trying to go on something longer, whatever it is. And so that was kind of like the motivation behind just having some sort of education available readily for people. So I started out doing in-person kind of like workshops where I have always like a classroom portion of it and then also kind of a like demo portion. And so I basically then just brought that also into like an online course for people that couldn't travel to the central coast of California, because that's usually where I host my workshops. And that's obviously pretty inaccessible for people that are living outside of like the California area. So I came up with the online course, which basically is just like it's like video and written format and like pictures that basically kind of like break down both like the classroom aspect of my workshops as also then like the videos of the demonstrations that I do at my workshops. Kind of like explaining to like all the different kinds of stock containment and like what type of situation would you maybe want to highline versus like an electric fence or versus like staking your animals out. All of that kind of stuff is the way I try to like present it and break it down. So yeah, so I offer in-person workshops. I've also started offering as like a build up from that, kind of like some guided rides where people can take their own horses out with me if they've taken either the workshop or the online course. Because I was also noticing kind of like what you were asking earlier about, how going out alone. Like for me and my unique upbringing, it was easy, but being in this space, I've also come to realize that that's really challenging, and sometimes that's like the threshold for people being able to get out there, is they don't have like a community of people around them and they don't want to go out by themselves for their very first overnight ride and have things go wrong. And so I've tried to kind of like bridge that gap too for people by saying, hey, bring your horse, we'll have a really small group, you've already done kind of like the education side of things where you've taken a workshop or you've been practicing skills at home. Now let's take those skills and like, I'll basically make sure that you don't have something go wrong on this first trip. Like I'll do the planning, I'll make sure that you're going to have a good campsite, the trail's not going to be like snowed in, and we'll go and we'll have that successful experience. So that way basically all these like fears that people tell themselves are what could go wrong, my horse is going to run away and like go back to the trailhead and leave me in the mountains, when those things don't happen, and they have a successful experience and they see what it's actually like out there, I think it then all those kinds of fears that keep people from like taking that leap are then alleviated. And sometimes too, people that have come on my overnight rides, I've only done it last year for the first time, they've then become pretty good friends, some of them that live close by, and then they continue going on trips afterwards, which has been like a fun extra bonus. So yeah, I'm basically just trying to see where there's gaps that keep people and barriers that keep people from getting in the backcountry with their horses. And honestly, like that's just my whole goal is how can I help lower those barriers through basically education or in-person hands-on experiences so that they can be equipped to going out there and not have it feel like kind of this like conceptualized and just too high of a barrier experience. Because I do think it's something that everyone should get to have, with their horses. And a lot of it is if you don't know the right person that can show you it, then it's kind of like not accessible to you. And so having it just be more accessible to people that like me grew up in a place where that was not really someone that you knew. I would like people to be able to have that without having to kind of make the same mistakes that I made.
That's good. Well, that's good that you're doing that. It's good that you're helping people get in the backcountry because I think if more people got in the backcountry, this world would be a really cool place.
Yeah.
I think it'd just
Yeah.
make it's just so good for people. At the same time, I really like not seeing very many people in the backcountry, but
I know.
but I
I know there's a
understand.
double-edged sword to
Yeah,
it. Yeah, and there's a little bit of like some places too, like when I go riding, like I won't tell people where I go, especially on social media, especially if there's like no permitting in place, because I don't, if there's an influx of people come into that
yeah,
space, they're really not equipped for dealing with it. I'm a little more willing to like share about places like Glacier National Park, which I know some people also wouldn't like why would we need even more people in Glacier? There's already so many.
yeah,
But at least honestly, when you get in the backcountry of Glacier National Park, it's not easy because of the whole permitting process. But if you do manage to, it doesn't feel crowded because they do have such established system in place that curtails kind of like the damages of so many people.
yeah,
Um, and so I feel a little less worried about like blowing up those places because they are able to deal with it. But yeah, certain areas where they don't have any kind of like permitting or ways to like curtail if they suddenly had a mass influx of people, those ones I tend to keep under wraps for like
yeah,
just, preserving the environment and not trying to ruin the experience for people that already are going out there.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
most of my listeners are already backcountry people. They love it. So hearing your story, they'll enjoy it. And,
Yeah,
I
I guess
encourage
like I
all
said,
of,
especially being someone who didn't grow up in the backcountry, there's always like that fine line of I don't want to keep it to myself because obviously I benefited so much from getting to have these experiences, but like I said, not wanting to overdo it. Yeah, there's a fine line to walk in
yeah,
terms of sharing it and encouraging people to like be able to be successful and have like really rich experiences with their stock. Versus also like, okay, but like what's too far? Yeah, there's a
yeah.
line to walk. And I'm always kind of like trying to figure out if I'm on the right side of that line.
Yeah. Well, get in the backcountry. It's good for you.
It
So,
is. I think it's really good for stock owners. You don't see too many people that can get in the backcountry with their stock who then, have some of the kind of, I feel like, problems that you see a lot of stock owners have where they're kind of like afraid of their stock or really just feeling at a loss of like how to proceed forward with them in terms of like communication. You don't see that in the backcountry with stock people. They have a certain level of just like comfort and confidence in their horsemanship of like just that comes from like a practicality standpoint that I think
yeah.
is really nice and that I wish that like all stock people could have with their animals.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, Jillian, at the end of my episodes, I like to ask my guests if they have any pieces of advice or word of advice for people going down this road of life, or it could be horsemanship advice, mulemanship advice, lifemanship. You've already given a ton of great things, but what's one last thing you'd like to tell my listeners here?
Oh, overall, that like it's really not as scary as I think a lot of people think it is out there. Like it honestly is a pretty like safe experience to go out in the backcountry. I mean, I did it. I got by knowing nothing at 22 years old, and like we all survived. So I feel like that should be a
Mhm.
vote of confidence for what is possible. And I think people, sometimes you have both sides. You have some people that are a little like overly self-inflated, but there's a lot of horse people, honestly, that I think underestimate their skills and their animal skills. And I think that they should be a little bit more like self-confident and feel okay in doing something that maybe they don't have like a game plan for. There's sometimes this idea of like you have to be so prepared or you're going to fail. And I think it is okay to do something you've never done before and just try and not be afraid to try it and with your animal and experimenting in your horsemanship. I think it's okay. I don't think you're going to ruin your mule. Mules are forgiving, horses are forgiving. You can experiment, and I don't think you should be afraid to experiment in what you're doing with your animal or even in your horsemanship.
Hey, Jillian, that's awesome. So I appreciate you coming on and appreciate this conversation. It's been fun. We could just go on and on.
I know.
Um,
Yeah, we'd be here forever.
so I mentioned your website, GillianLarson.net. Also, they need to check out your Instagram because you do a really cool job with your videos and your stuff. That's Thru_rider,
Yep.
correct? Yep. And it's awesome, you guys. It's really cool. Instagram, so check it out. But that's where you can find her. Reach out to her, ask her questions. Check out her workshops. It's really cool. Go for a ride with her. Go for a trip. It's cool. So thank you so much, Jillian. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much, Ty.
Heck yeah. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. If you'd be kind enough to leave us a review, we'd be grateful. 5 stars for Jillian, I think. So, and with that, you guys, God bless you, and we'll see you down the road.